Welcome back to Kids Life. Today we're talking about forgetfulness in children with Michael Grose from Parenting Ideas. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Now, do kids often use forgetfulness to cover being lazy or disorganised?
Good question. I think there's a group of kids who will forget if they know that someone else is going to remember for them.
Sure.
And there's another group who have difficulty remembering because they're not the most organised personally, or they're the big picture people who worry about the big picture, and I'm too worried about doing the big fun stuff.
Sure.
And I'm not going to worry about the details too much.
Yep.
Shall we look at each group?
Definitely.
All right, let's look at the first group, which often forgetful because someone else is going to pick up the slack for them. I had a daughter who was like that actually, and my youngest one, and I remember I'd taken her to kindergarten about the age of 4 or 5, and the kindergarten teacher met her in the foyer and said, "Sarah, can you put your library book in the library bag?" And Sarah, as quick as a flash, turned around and said, "Daddy forgot to pack it." And I was being, I was her memory. I'd been quite used to sort of reminding her all the time.
Sure.
And the kindergarten teacher reminded me and her, and she said, "I asked you, Sarah, not your dad." And she looked at me and said, "Dad, it's your job to make it easy for her to remember." Subtle difference. All right, so what she was actually saying is, I've given you the responsibility, I want you to remember, and Dad, you just got to make it easy for her to remember. And so what I did was I reminded her to leave her book by the door on the way out. So I didn't take the responsibility away, I just gave it to her, but just made it easy for her to remember.
Yep.
I think that's really important. What I do know is that kids will often forget things if there's someone else who's going to pick up the slack. They'll forget their lunches, they'll forget their homework, they'll forget all sorts of things if someone's there to remind them all the time and to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit about remembering whose responsibility is it. And as parents, actually, we've got to make sure that those who own the problem actually take responsibility for the problem.
Yes.
So that's important. So shall we look at the other group?
And the other group, yep.
The other group who often have difficulty getting themselves organised. Their personal organisational skills aren't that strong.
Right.
To put it politely.
Sure, there's a lot of kids in this group.
Easily distracted. They're the ones who will leave bags at school, lunches at home, notes at home, and it's not so much because someone else is going to do it for them, it's just that they're poorly organised. So lists work really well with those kids.
Okay.
Taking them through the groups of 3 work well with them. What's the first thing you've got to remember? What's the second thing? What's the third thing? So they do need help with the personal organisation.
Sure.
I've found that lists of 3 or lists of 5 work well with them.
Okay.
Rosters work well. So I forgot to do my chores. Okay, no, you didn't forget them because it's written there on a roster. So go and check on the fridge whose job it is today to feed the cat. So they like lots of visuals, like lots of concrete ways of helping them to be organised. As they get older, one of the best ways you can actually help those kids to be organised is to work out schedules. So from a homework perspective, it might be coming home and helping them work out their weekly schedule of homework and fitting in that, say, Tuesday night, that's your night for sport. Okay, so you don't do homework that night, you do it on Wednesday night. And so that personal organisation stuff is really important for those kids so that they can actually help and it takes the pressure away so that they can remember and not be forgetful.
And parents should identify in their own children which group they fit into?
So, most definitely, and I'm sure most parents listening to this will be able to do that if you know your kids well enough. And the personal organisational skills are really important. Even as kids move through adolescence, they often need a lot of help just getting themselves organised and laying their work out and organising their personal lives also with their school lives as well. And sometimes that can be as simple as just talking things through, laying things out, working backwards. Okay, what have you got to have done at the end of the week? Okay, let's work a little bit of a schedule out. So diaries are helpful. So there's lots of concrete ways we can actually help kids to become organised so that they don't have to forget. One of the reasons, this is the theory, and I'm a supporter of the theory, that one of the reasons why VCE in these days, or HSC in other states, works and benefits girls is the fact that you have to be well organised personally to do well in this day and age in year 12. back in the days of exams, you just had to be, be able to swat well and do well at exams. Now the whole notion of doing well and being successful in HSC or Year 12 in Australian states is you need to be well organised.
Yes.
And we know that girls are often far better at organising not just their own personal lives, but their whole study notion as well. So boys need an assistance in that as well, so
Definitely.
we can assist them there.
And getting kids to help out with chores around the house, they're either forgetting or they've actually forgotten, is the best way, like you said before, making a list, making a roster, schedule, those sort of things.
Yeah, and letting other kids remind letting siblings remind the slackers as well. So mum and dad, you don't have to take it to be your personal responsibility to make sure that each of your children do it.
Yeah. Put
it on a roster, change the roster around, and when there's a roster, the only thing a child needs to remember is to check that roster. And so your job might be to remind them in the morning to check the roster to see who's doing what during the day. And then it's up to the kids to remember.
Yeah.
So again, it's not your job to do the remembering, it's your job to actually remind kids to be responsible.
And
So give them the cue them in, but it's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. Because if you're always the one who's reminding them and always the one who's nagging them, well, why should I remember when you're going to remember for me?
Exactly, that's great advice. Thank you, Michael.
A pleasure.